Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, first of all, thank you, all of you, joining us here this evening. I'm particularly thankful to those coming from abroad, from Germany and from United States. I know you're still suffering from jet lag, so this dinner won't last very long. But before dinner, we invited two very special guest speakers to make very brief welcoming remark, and then the dinner speech by the guest. No further ado, I would like to proceed by inviting the speakers so that we can save some time, and so that you can have good rest tonight, and we have a full day ahead of us tomorrow. Well, first, the speaker is our former Prime Minister, Dr. Lee Hong-gu, who served Korean government twice as Deputy Prime Minister in charge of unification affairs for the government. Before that, being the leading scholar in the field of political science in Korea, he taught at the Seoul National University before he asked by the Korean government to serve in various capacities. He was recently actually served as our ambassador to the United States of America, and also before that he was our ambassador to United Kingdom. And then he also was asked by the political parties in Korea. Actually, he was the party leader of then government party, and so he served this country in various capacities. Nowadays, he writes very influential newspaper column and on all the issues Korea society is facing now. I can go on to illustrate his outstanding career in both academia and public service, but I should cut it here. And please join me in welcoming our former Prime Minister.
국제회의이기 때문에 그냥 저도 영어로 얘기를 하겠습니다. My longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Sagong, asked me to say a few words of welcome. But as he said, I have served twice as the minister in charge of North-South relations in Korean Peninsula. And since this conference is the main theme is the unification and Korean economy, I'll just say a few words since we have a main speaker waiting, our current Minister of Finance. Now, Germany and Korea shares important common characteristics, namely we were divided as a result of Second World War. "45 years after the division, in 1990, Germany was reunited. But Korea remains divided. This is the 67th year of division. And in the meantime, also, we had a war in 1950 to 53. So next year, July 27th, 2013, we will have the 60th anniversary of ceasefire. Now, in the meantime, since Germany was the only other really divided country, we have modeled many things after German institutions and German experiences. In fact, Ministry of Unification in Korea was modeled after the German institution in the German government. And our policies also copied many things from German experience. But as I said, Germany was reunited in 1990 when Cold War came to an end. But we are not able to do likewise. So we more or less reached the conclusion that you have to have a good policy, good institution, but above all, you have to be very lucky to achieve the unification. Now, I don't know when the luck will come to Korea, but we are waiting eagerly. There are some similarities, but big differences between Germany and Korea. Geopolitically, Germany is the biggest country in Europe, the central in location. Korea is amongst the three big countries, Russia, China, Japan. But unlike Germany, we are the smallest entity in this part of the world. And therefore, our fate very much still depends on the policies of bigger countries. And last year we had the delegation of German policymakers of the past, both West and East German, and they told us that it's not the Germans who really united the country, but the decision of the bigger countries, NATO and the Warsaw Pact countries, made a big decision. Namely, without the resolution of the German question, there cannot be peace in Europe. So with that decision, particularly the contribution of Mr. Gorbachev in Moscow, Germany was able to achieve the unification in 1990. So we hope somewhat similar things happen in this part of the world. I hope that both the United States and China in particular will make the Korean issue the highest priority issue to achieve peace in this part of the world, and this will bring some result. Now, this conference deals with the economy, and I have really nothing to say. I'll ask our main speaker, Minister Park, will say, give us a Korean view on the on economy and unification. Let me just say that when it comes to the economy and unification, it's not just a question of capacity. That is, do we have a sufficient economic capacity to handle the problem of unification? That's a very important issue. But also the important issue is, do we have a will or determination to pay what is needed for unification? Now, this is, of course, the very democratic country. And first of all, it's not easy, we are finding out, that to raise tax even for worthy the purpose. So, could we really ask our people to pay a great deal of sacrifice for unification? This is something we have to think about. Now, also, we have to differentiate two different things. Unification, like a German model. Namely, Germany was reunited basically because East Germany collapsed. So there is a possibility, of course, repeating the phenomenon on the Korean Peninsula, but we're not counting on that. So if it's a long, drawn-out affair for many years or many decades, then the cost will be enormously great, and I don't know how we're going to deal with this problem. Only thing I always say to our people is that unification cost will be enormous. It will be great. But the division cost is even greater. So let's think about what we should do and what sacrifices we should accept. But finally, unification in Korean Peninsula very much depends on the North Korea. We're hoping that North Korea will join the rest of the Asian countries to enjoy both peace and prosperity. Both China and Vietnam, governed by the Communist Party, have set a very positive experience or example. So we like to see North Korea follow it, but there's no guarantee. And the fact that North Korea has or claims to have the nuclear arms capability makes the situation even more difficult. So what I'm just said is it's a very difficult situation, but as the last country divided as a result of Second World War and the age of imperialism, we certainly like to achieve this objective before too long, and we very much hope the Germans will continue to have a big interest in this question. Again, welcome, and we'll have a very productive and successful conference in the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Lee, for very insightful remark. Now it's time to introduce our dinner speaker, the current Minister of Strategy and Finance, Dr. Park Jae-won. Minister Park was Minister of Employment and Labor before he moved to this Ministry of Strategy and Finance. He played a key role in this administration as the senior official in various capacities. Before that, he served again in our National Assembly as a National Assemblyman. And then also he got his master's and PhD degrees from Harvard University. And as a scholar, he taught at the Sungkyunkwan University, one of the leading universities in Korea. I also must take this opportunity to congratulate him for his key role in the getting the Climate Green Fund Secretariat to Seoul. I know he played a very the essential role in hosting that very important United Nations, the CGF Secretariat to Korea. Again, I can go on to introduce him, but I should cut short since we have to fill our empty stomachs soon. And let me invite Minister Park at this point. Please join me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Il Sagwon. And the question raised by former Prime Minister Lee reminds me of the golden rule or basic principle with regard to, the no pain or no gain. Without any cost or sacrifice in the short run, you could not achieve any gain or benefits in the long run. That might be one thought to his questions with regard to capacity versus will of reunification of Korean Peninsula. Well, Honorable Hong Koo-lee, former Prime Minister, Il Sa-gong, Chairman of the Institute for Global Economics, Norbert Ashburn, resident representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Korea. I used to learn German when I was in high school, but I forgot how to pronounce the Germans, except say wie geht es Ihnen or Guten Morgen. And Yong-hwan Kim, chairman of the Korea Exim Bank. I extend my heartfelt gratitude for organizing such an important event to discuss unification and the Korean economy with renowned think tanks, scholars from home and abroad. I would like to express my thanks to all the distinguished guests here today. Korea received 2 pieces of very good news last week. We became the host of the Green Climate Fund and regained the seat on the UN Security Council. In particular, the GCF is set to become a key international organization in the area of climate change. It's even being considered as the next World Bank. Korea was chosen as GCF host country. This is an extremely significant achievement, not just for Korea, but for the whole world. It shows the international community has recognized our continued efforts on green growth policies and that our status on the international stage has improved. I'd like to take this opportunity to give a special thanks to everyone who has dedicated their efforts and given their full support to us rejoining the UN Security Council and hosting the GCF. For the past 5 years, the Lee Myung-bak administration has consistently pushed ahead with economic policies like in green growth that would help the Korean economy advance to the next level. As a result, Korea has set an example by making a textbook recovery from the global financial crisis. Also, by signing a considerable number of free trade agreements, Korea's economic territory is now ranked as 3rd in the global economy. Against this backdrop, Korea has become the 9th country to surpass $1 trillion in trade despite the global economic recession. On top of that, all 3 major credit rating agencies have raised our sovereign credit ratings to the highest level. However, we must not remain content with our current achievements. The global economy is ever changing, uncertainties persist, and the Korean economy still faces many challenges. One of those challenges is a historical one that has been with us for the past 60 years. It's the challenge of unification. North and South Korea have led many different paths for over 60 years, and now the 2 countries could not be more different. This has increased our fear of unification. Study results also show that unification will incur massive costs. This only further burdens our fear. However, unification is a historical challenge we cannot avoid. It is part of our history we cannot go against. Today we remain divided. Someday, North and South will become one. We must be fully prepared for when that day comes along. We must remember that our fear may come from our ignorance. Properly understanding and preparing for unification will rather provide us with new possibilities and opportunities. For example, if the North's high-quality workforce and abundant natural resources are combined with the South's experience of rapid economic growth and capital, we will be able to realize our high growth potential. Furthermore, unification will broaden the geopolitical horizons of the Korean Peninsula by connecting the Pacific and the Eurasian continent. Korea is sure to become a key nation in the Asia-Pacific region. It was in this context that Goldman Sachs forecast the GDP of unified Korea would surpass that of G7 nations like Japan and Germany. So while unification poses a risk, it is also an opportunity that will never come again. The Korean government will keep this in mind and take careful, gradual steps toward unification. Korea's efforts are essential, of course, in preparing for unification and pursuing prosperity. I believe, however, in line with these efforts, neighboring countries and the international community also have very important roles to play. The world is closely watching North Korea's next move with mixed feelings of expectation and anxiety. The global community is hoping for North Korea's new leadership to choose a path towards reform and opening. There is an old saying that goes, quote, like the mother bird pecks a hole in her eggs while her baby chick is hatching, great work can be achieved when concerted efforts are made from both inside and outside, unquote. In line with international movements for reform in North Korea, the international community should also lend a helping hand to make things and changes happen. This can be done by sharing experiences in a regime transition or economic development. We should also support the diversification and opening up of the North's external economic relations. To do so, we must make joint efforts with neighboring countries and strengthen cooperation with the various international organizations like the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, ESCAP, Greater Truman Institute, and EBRD. Solid networks with such international organizations will greatly help open up the North and relieve unification costs. When both the inside and outside work together harmoniously, we will finally be able to usher in a new era of peace on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia. One of Europe's renowned intellectuals and French futurist Jacques Attali says in his book that, quote, the future outlook of the world in 2050 is being determined now. What will happen by 2100 is being considered now, unquote. I would like to stress that the challenge of unification is an open possibility. Just like Jacques Attali said, we are already determining what a unified future Korea will look like. We should spare no efforts in working to achieve unification. However, we should also move forward step by step, not losing our sense of balance, nor forgetting our responsibility. Korea's future depends on how we prepare for the challenges that accompany unification. I would like to close my remarks by inviting all of you to share your valuable insights and suggest a future direction for unification and the Korean economy. Thank you.
Tonight's dinner is hosted by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Can I invite Dr. Norbert Eschborn to propose a toast?
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Norbert Eschborn. I'm the representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation of Germany to Korea, both South and North. And it is my organization's privilege and pleasure to host this welcome dinner tonight at this very important seminar on unification and the Korean economy, a topic I think was long overdue to be dealt with such very important and knowledgeable speakers. My gratitude, therefore, goes to His Excellency Dr. Il Kong for organizing this and in inviting us to be co-hosts of this event. And my appreciation goes also to the Korea Exim Bank, the Korea Development Institute, and the Peterson Institute for International Economy for being together with us in organizing this event. As Germans, we know how the pain of a divided nation feels. We therefore can honestly show compassion with our Korean friends. Let me therefore, at the beginning of this very important conference, propose a toast which looks into the future. I would like to propose a toast saying, whenever it will be, to the happiness of the Korean people and Korean unification. Cheers.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you all agree with me in saying that this morning's sessions were extraordinarily valuable and insightful and illuminating. And when you gather a good group of speakers, you end up with good meetings. Since we have such an excellent group of speakers, so we had a very, very valuable, insightful meetings this morning. I wish we just had more time, but now we have to fill our stomach now. But before doing so, we have very, very special luncheon speaker, whom you know very well, the Minister Kim Seung-hwan, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade. As you know, he has had outstanding career in public service, particularly in diplomacy. He served in many the countries all over the world as Korean diplomat, and he served the ambassadors in Austria and Kazakhstan, and also he was called in by the foreign ministry to serve as vice minister, and then he served as senior secretary to the current administration, the senior secretary for foreign relations for this administration, and particularly President Lee. He deserved the congratulations from all of us, from all Koreans, and our colleagues by leading Korea's endeavor to attract the Green Climate Fund Secretariat to be established in Korea. And also, he led the Korean endeavor to get a seat in the UN National Security Council. For that, he deserves a special congratulations. Please give him a big hand for that. Well, with this, I would like to invite him to share his thought on our unification. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for kind words and kind introduction. And Chairman mentioned you had very insightful and rewarding discussion this morning, and I just had my small thoughts on unification. So it is really a great honor and pleasure for me to have this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on unification. a theme of crucial significance not only for Korea but also for Northeast Asia as a whole. My special thanks again to Chairman Sagong-il for inviting me to speak before such an array of dignitaries and wise men. I would first of all like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to all of you for your sincere interest in this issue, as well as your willingness to make constructive contributions to the realization of our dream of a unified Korea. Without doubt, the government alone cannot pave the way for unification. There is a need for collective wisdom and support from as wide a base as possible. In this respect, your active role is greatly appreciated. I would further like to say that I am very pleased to note the broad participation from abroad, especially from Germany, as the German unification has long served and will continue to serve as an invaluable reference for our own process of unification. Distinguished guests, this morning you have actively engaged in a stock-taking of inter-Korean relations, as well as exploring the benefits and costs of unification. Given the uncertainties surrounding the Korean Peninsula and the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia, it is not an easy task to come up with a clear and reliable sketch of the current state. Nevertheless, we have to make relentless efforts to ensure that our policies and strategies are firmly based on an accurate and objective assessment, no matter how hard it may be. In comparison, the economic and political and strategic benefits and costs of unification seem to be relatively less difficult to grasp. Bearing this in mind, I would like to expand further upon your discussion this morning by offering some reflections on the blueprint of a unified Korea and the essential prerequisites for unification. Before getting into the details, I wish to emphasize that unification constitutes a heart-throbbing imperative for Koreans. Having developed a natural sense of national unity throughout our long history, we perceive the current division of Korea as a temporary aberration, and as such, have a strong and ardent desire for unification. Distinguished guests, it goes without saying that unification will bring numerous benefits. At the top of the list, I believe, are peace and security. The ongoing tensions and intermittent military confrontations between the South and the North, which might escalate into another bloody and devastating war, render the Korean Peninsula one of the world's most dangerous potential flashpoints. Indeed, this has been one of the predominant factors in the so-called Korea discount in the international financial markets. In a unified democratic Korea, we will be able to enjoy much greater peace and freedom under a safer and more secure environment. In other words, a meaningful version of turning swords into plowshares will be available. Resource-wasting confrontations will be replaced with cooperative efforts to form a single and integrated economy in which resources that are currently wasted under the unstable coexistence could be put to better and more efficient use. In the unified free market economy, the complementary economic structure of the South and the North will serve as a catalyst for materializing the great potential for economic prosperity. As a case in point, the capital and technology of the South would be successfully combined with a competent labor force and the rich mineral resources of the North to produce a lasting synergic effect. According to a Goldman Sachs analysis on the potential of the North Korean economy in terms of GDP, a unified Korea would overtake France, Germany, and possibly Japan in 30 to 40 years should the growth potential of North Korea be realized. Moreover, unification would replace the demilitarized zone, bisecting the Korean Peninsula with the newly built highways, railroads, and the air and the sea routes connecting places not only on the peninsula but also in Northeast Asia. As an open place where the continental and the maritime economies meet, a unified Korea has great potential to become a geo-economic hub that could bridge the two economies and facilitate trade within the region. It is also noteworthy that with the advent of the Asia-Pacific era, the center of the world economy is significantly gravitating towards East Asia. All in all, this global trend, in tandem with the advantageous locus of the Korean Peninsula, is sure to offer great opportunities for a unified Korea to play an expanded role in the region. At this juncture, distinguished guests, I would like to point out that enormous benefits unification would bring will not be limited to within the confines of the Korean Peninsula. A unified Korea could substantially benefit its neighbors in various ways. Unification would transform Korea from the Cold War's last fault line into the first springboard for regional peace and co-prosperity in the new era. First of all, a unified Korea will bring about peace and stability in the region. The unpredictable nature and provocations of the North Korea regime have constituted one of the root causes of regional instability. A peaceful, stable, and prosperous unified Korea would foster a security environment conducive to lasting peace and stability, as well as prosperity for the whole region. From this peaceful regional environment, our neighbors will be able to garner considerable peace dividends. On the economic front, a unified Korea will provide its neighbors with robust infrastructure for increased economic activities. For instance, the Korean railroad network connecting the Asian transshipment hub of Busan to the transcontinental railroad would contribute to the opening up of a cheaper, faster, and safer route for overland transportation between Eurasia and the Asia-Pacific region. As a result, neighbors of a unified Korea could greatly expand their trade volume in both directions via the land bridge stretching from Busan to Eurasia. Moreover, a unified Korea would also provide a favorable business climate for its neighbors, especially with regard to the huge business opportunities that would be generated in the rebuilding process. Tapping these opportunities, neighboring countries would be able to gain fresh momentum to boost their economic growth. Especially China and Russia would have every reason to raise the stakes in the development of their economically less developed areas bordering the Korean Peninsula, as the reconstruction of the North would require massive new investment which could bring a positive spillover effect for the border areas. Distinguished guests, I have briefly touched upon the blueprint of a unified Korea and the potential benefits that will accompany unification. As I turn to prerequisite for unification, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the elimination of the North Korean nuclear weapons program. Unification will considerably reshape the geopolitical landscape in Northeast Asia, translating a unified Korea into a force to be reckoned with quite seriously in the regional strategic equation. Against this backdrop, a unified but nuclear Korea is the last thing regional powers would want to see on the Korean Peninsula. This is why the Korean government, together with the international community, time and again is urging North Korea to turn over a new leaf by taking concrete measures aimed at denuclearization and return to the negotiating table as soon as possible. In parallel with the denuclearization process, diplomatic efforts should be focused on creating an environment favorable for unification. In this context, some constructive suggestions merit our attention. Transforming the existing armistice agreement into a legal framework that can safeguard perpetual peace on the Korean Peninsula would be a noble idea. At the regional level, we could take a positive look at the idea of keeping up the momentum of the six-party talks and helping the talks to evolve into a cooperative multilateral security architecture to cope with conflicts and the frictions as well as various security issues in the region. While exploring these multilateral initiatives, it is also imperative to continue to strengthen and deepen the strategic ties with our neighbors. With the Korean Peninsula located at the intersection of major strategic fault lines, it is crystal clear that the success of the unification process will depend greatly on how well we can develop and manage our bilateral relations with important stakeholders. There is no denying that strong support by countries with vital stakes in the Korean Peninsula is an essential part of the unification process, as evidenced by the critical role played by the United States and the Soviet Union in the German case. As renewed Sino-American relations are evolving in the regional as well as global setting, it is of paramount importance inter alia to develop the Korea-China strategic cooperative partnership in harmony with the Korea-US alliance. Distinguished guests, as I wrap up my remarks today, I would like to point to the ever-growing importance of multi-layered diplomacy. In spite of all the positive aspects and the rosy picture of a unified Korea, the path to unification shall not be free of hurdles. It is indeed a daunting task to successfully rise above such challenges and achieve unification. Even though some challenges, such as denuclearization, seem to be insurmountable at certain times, I believe that there is no challenge that cannot be overcome if we make concerted efforts with a firm resolve. In this sense, it is essential that the government and the civil society join forces in a concerted effort to tackle various challenges within Korea and at the international level, and to foster an atmosphere favorable for unification. As I mentioned at the outset, the government alone cannot get the job done, and I sincerely hope for your active engagement in solidifying the foundation for a unified Korea. In the past few months, I had the privilege to have the opportunity to exchange views on Korean unification with the former leaders of Germany, including Federal President Horst Köhler. They advised me, you should be prepared for the day it will become anytime sooner or later. And this is the reason why we are having this conference, to be prepared for unification. I do hope that I have succeeded in whetting your appetite for the imminent task of Korean unification and have offered you some palatable food to think about. Thank you for your kind attention, and bon appetit.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased again to have the opportunity to speak to you. Actually, I'm replacing Professor Paquet, someone much more knowledgeable about the issue we are discussing right now, which is economic integration, actually, of Eastern Europe, of Eastern Germany into global economy. He gave me his papers, so I will be following more or less his ideas, but along some own examples and ideas which I have gathered during recent years when I was a very frequent traveler to Dresden and got to know the companies there. So I should cover in my address 3 different elements. First of all, the situation of East German economy and industry immediately after unification. Secondly, how it developed then in the last 20 years and to which extent it was successful in integrating into global economy. And thirdly, whether there are some points from this that would be of particular interest to Korea. Okay, so firstly, what was the setting, what was the situation right after unification? I should here first mention this very particular situation which we had immediately after the wall broke down in Germany. The situation where there was a unique chance for unification, but at a time when Soviet troops, when Russian troops still were on our soil, at a time when people were walking around in Eastern Germany with the slogan, either you will bring us the German mark or we will go to the German mark, which means either we are able to run this unification very, very quickly, or otherwise there would be a mass exodus from GDR. And we have seen this kind of mass exodus in 1961. So there was a high worry that rather than having a unified country, we might end up with two countries being even more separated than they were before. This is the overall background why Chancellor Kohl and why the German governments took such radical decisions as they did with the economic, monetary and social union that was negotiated within 6 months and that came into force only 9 months after the Berlin Wall came down. Now, the consequences of this very radical decision, the consequences of this call for the German mark from East German population was that there were some decisions which, from a purely economic standpoint, you could easily criticize, but from a political standpoint, were correct. One of them was the exchange rate of 1-to-1, which also applied to wages, which applied to pensions, and which applied to subsidies. Consequently, the wages in East German industry, which were roughly at 7% of the West Germans, they rose within 1 year from 7 to 35, and in the next year to 50% of the West German level. That means this enormous increase of wages on one hand, and on the other hand, the fact that East German companies then started to factor on German mark, which made their products much more expensive. These two reasons led to an immediate breakdown, almost complete breakdown of East German industry, which within 1 year lost 2/3 of its production capacity. So there were two elements. The internal market in East Germany broke down since people wanted to buy West German goods, firstly. Okay. Secondly, the traditional markets of East German goods in Eastern Europe, in Russia, and so on and so forth, broke down since they were not ready to pay the higher prices. And as a consequence, we were faced with a situation where there was virtually in the first year a crackdown, or a complete crackdown of industry. Now, how did things continue afterwards? There was the monetary union. There was, on the other hand, the Treuhandanstalt for privatization, and there was the big program of rebuilding Eastern Germany. The Treuhandanstalt, they privatized in a very short period, in 4 years basically, the traditional state-owned East German industry, which in some cases was a success. In many cases, they would have needed more time, or in many cases, the private sector was pushed aside by Treuhand companies which got state financing. And so the start was a fairly difficult one. But over time, the people understood that their production costs were too high, that the wages were too high. So if you look in the entire period between 1990 and 2010, you will see that East German wages rose at a slower pace than West German wages. You will see that productivity of East German industry continuously improved up to the point where most companies today are highly competitive at a global scale. At the same time, governments decided to really focus on a few areas and a few locations, clusters. One of them was Dresden and the semiconductor industry, which to a considerable extent proved to be successful with many backlashes. For example, 3 years ago when Qimonda broke down or had to go bankrupt. Another example is solar industry in Saxony-Anhalt, One more example is in Thuringia is the Jen-Optik, which means optical industry and car industry in Eisenach. So what was left? What was left after unification was basically the brains, the quality of skilled people, the technicians, the engineers, and they basically were the ones that rebuilt Eastern German industry. This is true for Dresden as much as it is for Jena and other areas. Now, if we look in terms of numbers, we could see that today there is still an East-West wage ratio where Eastern Germany people earn more or less 2/3 of the wages in Western Germany. If we look at the unemployment figures, we can see that they are decreasing, they have been decreasing constantly from 2005 until now. If we compare them in detail, then we see that, for example, in 2007, it was 16.8 in Eastern Germany and 10.5 in West Germany. Now it is 11% in East Germany and 6% in West Germany. Now there are two conclusions. If you compare the eastern and western part, there is still a considerable gap. But if you compare the eastern part to the rest of Europe, then the picture looks completely different, which means to say rather positive on a global scale. So the fact that West German industry, West German economy rose and grew so enormously over the last couple of years has to be taken into account if we want to compare the two. We are now at 68% for Eastern Germany as compared to 100% as far as the gross domestic product per capita is concerned. If we look at the part that industry has in overall economy, it has risen from 11 to 17% in Eastern Germany. In Western Germany, it's 21 to 25%. Again, if you compare East and West, you would conclude there is still a gap. If you compare Eastern Germany to France, Italy, UK, you will find out that the level of industry is much higher in Eastern Germany than in any of these countries. So overall speaking, the conclusion certainly can be that over a period of 20 years, we seem to have done a fairly good job in order to bring Eastern German industry into a global economy. There are specific elements where there is, one could say, a deficit compared to Western Germany. One is, for example, that the R&D base is remarkably weaker than in Western Germany. Another one is that the export share of their products is still weaker than in Western Germany. And so there seems to still to be a kind of East-West gap, which is not only true between Eastern and Western Germany, but which is also true for the same elements between Eastern European countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and, for example, West Germany. If we come to the question whether any conclusions should be drawn in terms of economic development for Korea, then I would mention, like this morning, that the initial setting may be completely different. Therefore, these decisions on the monetary and social union are not necessarily to be repeated in a different context. If there is more time, there should be different rules on a monetary union. If there is more time, the question of a social union, for example, in the case of Korea, could be responded to in a completely different way. The issue of property rights should be solved early on or from the very beginning. And fourthly, the expectation management should be different. If there is more time, people should know from the very beginning that it will need roughly 30 to 40, perhaps even 50 years, until the same level of wealth and well-being can be achieved in both parts of the country concerned. So, after all, if these elements are being taken into account, then there may be excellent or much better chances for reindustrializing North Korea than have been the case in Eastern Germany. Since in Eastern Germany, as Minister Carstensen mentioned this morning, it was extremely difficult to get any foreign investor. Why? Since investments in Poland, in Hungary, in Czech Republic, which had opened at precisely the same moment their markets, were much more attractive financially than investments in East Germany. So they were in a particularly difficult situation, which is not the same situation which you would see here. And then also you have natural resources in North Korea. You will need a kind of working bench for South Korea anyway. So there are many elements which suggest that there could be fairly better chances for reindustrializing the North than may have been the case in Germany. Thank you very much for your attention.